Welcome to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast, powered by StatRoute.com. And now, here's your host, Ryan Skullroot.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullroot. I am your host, and we are back actually doing a full week of episodes after having a little bit of an off week last week, dealing just with some family stuff. We had my birthday, and I didn't feel like doing a couple episodes, and we did get the one episode in to kind of go over the game previews for Week 8. But this week we are doing the full gamut, the full slate. So we are officially back now that we are halfway through the fantasy season. Halfway through the fantasy season after finishing Week 8. Seasons usually go through week 16, and so it's been quite the season so far. I have teams ranging anywhere from 1-6 to 5-2. So it's all over the place. I hope everyone has been having a pretty good season so far this year. Real quick, we wanted to make sure to let you know, or to ask you, request that you go ahead and hit that subscribe button on the podcast, whether you are watching this video on YouTube or you are listening on Google Play, iTunes, CastBox, Stitcher, wherever you listen to our podcast. We would greatly appreciate it if you would take the time to hit that subscribe button. Make sure to like this specific episode. And also, if you could go ahead and actually share the episode, whether it be on social media, wherever, we would love for to get whatever help we can in spreading the fantasy football love. And so we would appreciate anything that you guys would be willing to do to help us out in that manner. One other thing we want to do, we had been doing some ad reads for this new company that we were partnering with, and officially actually put up an actual response about it or message about it on all of our social media channels. But we wanted to just do a quick reminder to please go to prolytics.com. That's pro-lytics.com. pro-lytics.com. They are a analytics basically for DFS. They use their own artificial intelligence learning machine to do predictive analysis, roster construction. You can do mass roster constructions with variances, and they'll create mass entries for you, and you can import them straight into FanDuel and DraftKings from there. So really a fantastic website that we as a staff have used for our own DFS lineups. I had a pretty good lineup today that I had set up using some of my picks from their cheat sheet. So really it's a solid group. I've met the founders. I think that they are absolutely awesome. We're going to try to get one of the founders on who actually wrote the AI engine. We want to get her on to the show. We'll see what we can do about that, maybe this week or next week, to kind of talk about what they do and all that. So again, go to pro-lytics, pro-lytics.com, and sign up, and you will get, if you use the promo code or the coupon code SkullKingFF, that's all lowercase and it's case sensitive, SkullKingFF, you will get 40% off your first month. So with all that being said, I think that's pretty much it for the announcements. Why don't we go ahead and hop into the headlines.
Today's headlines.
And starting off the headlines, definitely an interesting one to start off with. Story number one, apparently trade talks involving Kenyan Drake have been progressing to the point that he is actually, if I read this correctly, he is actually not making the trip to Pittsburgh for this game on Monday night. So for those of you listening to it, that means tonight's game. So very interesting. He's not even traveling with the team. So obviously they've already got something pretty much in the works. If they're not even having him come, I mean, he's automatically just gonna get his bye or whatever and go to wherever he is most likely being traded to. Be interesting to see where he's going. There are a few teams that are somewhat running back needy, and so definitely going to be interesting to see where he goes and what that'll do. I mean, Miami is basically going into full tank mode at this point, tank for Tua or whoever the quarterback is that they're going to draft. So definitely interesting to watch where that's going to be going. I think that depending on the team that he goes to, Kenyan Drake could actually have some more fantasy relevance than he does right now. We'll have to wait and see to see where he actually goes. But for right now, I think that he is definitely he definitely could have a little more fantasy relevance on a team that actually uses the running back or just has an offense that can actually move the ball. So so definitely something to keep an eye on. And we'll kind of see where that goes. Moving on to story number 2. Alvin Kamara missed this week, week 8, with his ankle injury. They thought he was going to be questionable, and pregame they decided that he was not going to be able to go, which sucks for me because my phone has not been working, and I could not change Alvin Kamara out of my lineup in time. Still won one of those matches with Alvin Kamara in my lineup, so good for that. So yeah, he's expected to come back week 10. Obviously, he won't be coming next week because of the fact that he is they're going into their bye week for week 9. So moving on to the next. So for those of you who need, obviously you're not going to use him next week anyways. So make sure you've got, you listen in tomorrow night for our waiver wire show to see what we can use to kind of fill in the spot. Moving on, the next one, another guy who is basically not expected to come back until week 10 is David Johnson. He is the announcement kind of came out today that he is going to missed today's game, and that he will most likely miss the Thursday night football game. Let me actually pull up Arizona and who they're playing. Week 9, the Thursday night football game it's going to it's going to be San Francisco at Arizona, which that sounds like that's going to be an absolutely ugly game. Especially with how badly San Francisco just absolutely pounded the Carolina Panthers today. So David Johnson is expected to he's expected to miss the Thursday night football game and then come back in week 10. So hopefully they're able to get him right and that he is able to come back and finish out strong for the rest of the season. Just a couple other stories that we wanted to cover real quick. Apparently there was one of the messages was about Rashad Penny and the fact that he was active today for the game. And part of that, as part of saying that he was active for the game, apparently potential teams will be watching. I'm kind of surprised that there are already teams that the Seahawks would already be looking to trade away Rashad Penny. It would be interesting to see what they could get for him. So we'll kind of see how that goes, considering he was the first-round pick in 2018. I know that he was actually he was a bit of a surprise pick when he was picked by the Seahawks that early. I want to say he was, 20th or something like that in the first round, or 25th or whatever. The fact that he went in the first round was what was so surprising. And the thing about Rashad Penny is people forget that when the Seahawks drafted him, they got a call just a couple minutes later from another team that was trying to trade for Rashad Penny. Rumor has it that it was the Lions who ended up taking Kerryon Johnson a little bit later. So we'll there potentially could still be some interest in Rashad Penny. Obviously, they're not going to get a first-round pick back for him, but it'll be interesting to see what they do get back for Penny if they just so happen to decide to trade him. A couple other notes. AJ Green looks to be in line to return Week 10. The Rams apparently are looking to trade Aqib Talib after having Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib as their two starting corners. They've already traded away Peters, and it looks like they're about to try to trade away Aqib Talib. Remember, the trade deadline is Tuesday, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I may pop up with an extra little video somewhere, just kind of going over the fantasy relevance of whatever trade stuff goes on. Mahomes is looking at a Week 10 return as well. So, honestly, Matt Moore has not been doing terrible in taking over for Mahomes in this offense. So, really, the defense is what's really been struggling. So, and honestly, this team is built. It's not built to stop teams. It's built to outscore teams, which is why they have Patrick Mahomes. And even with the defense that they have, their defense isn't that great. It still gives up a ton of points. And so really this team was built to try to outscore other teams. And so hopefully they'll get back on track. And Mahomes, like I said, is eyeing a return in Week 10. Davante Adams looks like he is likely to return in Week 9 game against the Chargers. Hopefully he is able to come back for that. I know that, again, there are so many people that have been waiting for him to come back from his injury. Hopefully he will be ready to go next week against the Chargers. It's going to be an away game at L.A. So even though it's at L.A., about 80% of that crowd is going to be Packers fans. So, all right. That is it for the headlines. We want to go ahead and take a quick little break here for a little advertisement, and then we will get right into this week's Kings and Stings and finish it off with the preview of the Monday night football game. Have your fantasy teams been struggling this year? Or perhaps you've been doing pretty well but want to put yourself over the top? Then make sure to visit our friends over at Finish First Fantasy Advisors. They are the premier one-on-one consulting firm that specializes in providing you with expert support to help guide you to the championship. You will be matched with one of their expert advisors to provide you with the season-long insight for your redraft, dynasty, or DFS formats. Their advisors will contact you weekly to answer all of your questions and provide you the needed information to get to the next level. Set up a free 15-minute consultation by emailing them at info@finishfirstfantasy.com or by visiting them at www.finishfirstfantasy.com. That's www.finishfirstfantasy.com. All right, we are back. It's time to get into our Kings and Stings, going over the best and worst performances of Week 8. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and hop into it. Starting off with the quarterbacks. Our number 3 king, Mr. Aaron Rodgers, finishing off the night. 305 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 6 rushes for 29 yards. Our number 2 king is Deshaun Watson, finishing with 279 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, but also had 46 rushing yards himself. And our number 1 king of the week, which I am part of a lot of different NFL fan groups. One of them is the New York Giants group that I can't believe how many times I've seen it. If we lose again, we need to start Eli Manning. Well, Daniel Jones was not the reason that they lost to the Lions today, going for 322 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, also had 13 rushing yards. He did lose a fumble, but overall he was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy this week. So moving on to the running backs. At number 3, Mr. Latavius Murray, 21 carries, 102 yards and a touchdown. Also 9 receptions for 55 yards and a touchdown. Did a great job filling in for the injured Alvin Kamara against, well, let's be honest, against a very lackluster Arizona defense. So number 2, absolutely ruling the roost for the San Francisco 49ers. Mr. Tevin Coleman, 11 carries, 105 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 catches for 13 yards, and another touchdown. Finished with 4 TDs on the day. Mr. Tevin Coleman absolutely rocking it. But the number one man of the hour, Mr. Aaron Jones, 13 carries for 67 yards, 7 catches, 159 yards, 2 touchdowns. I believe I saw in a stat at the end of the game that Aaron Jones, his 159 yards was the most receiving yards by a running back in Green Bay since like 1940 something. So just absolutely killing it. Great game for Aaron Jones. And so yeah, moving on to our wide receiver kings. Number 3, Mr. Kenny Golladay, 6 catches, 123 yards, 2 TDs. Great to see him really get off the schneid and have a solid game. Number 2, Mr. Cooper Kupp, 7 catches, 220 yards, and a TD. It was great to have him in my DFS lineups tonight. And number 1, who I actually had on the bench in at least one, if not 2 different leagues, Mr. Mike Evans, 11 catches, 198 yards, and 2 TDs. So absolutely stellar performance from him. Again, the reason that he was on my bench was, again, my phone was, messing with me. It's basically turned into a tablet, and so warning to all Google phone users. All right, our tight end kings. And almost no one had any of these guys in their lineups, or even on their teams for the most part. I believe all 3 of these guys are owned in less than 20% of leagues. They're widely available in all 10-team leagues that I've played in. So starting with number 3, Mr. Jonnu Smith, 6 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Number 2, Darren Fells of Houston, 6 catches, 58 yards, 2 touchdowns. And number 1, Mr. Ryan Griffin, 4 catches, 66 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion. Just a warning, none of these guys are guys that I'd be actively going after on the waiver wire, except for maybe Jonnu Smith, simply because he seems to have a really good rapport with Ryan Tannehill, and Delaney Walker is still out, as far as we know, and may miss this next week as well. So as far as that goes, Jonnu Smith, I believe, is the most likely guy that you'd really want to pick up. Moving on to the stings, these are the ones that hurt the most. So, starting off with the quarterbacks. Now again, these on the stings, these are guys that have actually, I try to keep them owned in 65% or more of leagues. A lot of these guys are actually in 70% or more. So, guys that are most likely to have actually been started in leagues. So, number 3 in the quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins, 285 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, no turnovers, just it was only passing yards. So it's not a great output from him. Number 2 is Mr. Phillip Rivers, 201 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And our number 1 QB sting is Mr. Kyler Murray, owned in I think 90% of Yahoo leagues. 220 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and only 13 rushing yards to go along with it. So pretty much all 3 of those guys, if you had them starting for you, ouch. Moving on to the running back stings of the week. Number 3, Le'Veon Bell, 9 carries, 23 yards, 3 catches for 12 yards today against the Jaguars. Just rough sledding for the Jets in general. Number 2 is a guy that was very popular to pick up off the waiver wire, owned in 70% of leagues, Mr. Ty Johnson, expecting to really take over after Kerryon Johnson went on IR, and he finishes with 7 carries for 25 yards and 1 catch for 13 yards against a very lackluster Giants defense at home. We may need to reassess what we're going to expect out of Ty Johnson moving forward. Our number 1 running back sting again is Chase Edmonds. 7 carries for 8 yards, 2 catches for 5 yards. Really, we kind of saw this coming simply because the New Orleans defense is so tough. They are so good, and they're really rough on running backs. So this kind of performance should have been expected out of Chase Edmonds. Moving on to the wide receivers. Number 3 wide receiver sting, Corey Davis, 2 catches for 9 yards. And he's one of the guys who was on the lower end of being owned. I want to say he's owned in like 60%, 65% of leagues. Mr. Larry Fitzgerald is our number 2 wide receiver sting, 2 catches for 8 yards. And our number 1 sting, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, owned in 72% of the leagues, went for 1 catch for 4 yards in a game where Aaron Rodgers throws for over 300. So rough day for a couple of those guys. Moving on, our tight end stings. I've got these a little out of order. This isn't in terms of this one isn't completely in terms of how many points they scored, because technically our number 1 sting scored the most points of these guys, but where he was drafted matters in this conversation. So our tight end stings, starting off, our number 3 sting is Gerald Everett, 2 catches for 15 yards. So in half-point PPR, that's what, 2.5 points? Ouch. Greg Olsen, 2 catches for 13 yards. So that's 2.3 points in half-point PPR. And our number 1 sting, it's 3 points that he scored. But Zach Ertz scoring only 3 points. He has been he does not have a 100-yard game, I think, yet on the season. And he has been under like 8 points for like the 3rd or 4th week in a row. So he has really been struggling in this offense. So those are our kings and stings. So real quick, since there's not a whole lot to talk about in this Monday Night Football game because it's the Steelers and the Dolphins, let's go ahead and just do a quick preview of the game, and then we will call it an episode. So starting off with the Dolphins, if you're really desperately looking for someone to help you this week, the Ryan Fitzpatrick is going up against the 20th ranked defense, or the 20th best defense in terms of giving up. No, they give up the 20th most points to the fantasy points to the quarterback position. So they're pretty good. The Steelers are pretty good against quarterbacks. Mark Walton is getting the start. Obviously, Kenyan Drake isn't playing, so it's going to be a combination of Walton, Ballage, and Gaskin. The Steelers are top 10 in terms of giving up points to the running back position. So it's going to be tough sledding for the running backs. Preston Williams and Devontae Parker. I'm still not using either of them. I just can't trust them. You'd have to be in a deeper league, 14 to 16 teams with the deep rosters, for me to want to use either one of them in my lineups this week. And even though it's a very favorable matchup, the Steelers give up the fourth most amount of points, fantasy points, to the tight end position. Mike Gesicki is not a guy that I want to be playing this week. So if you're absolutely desperate and need something, I guess you can go that direction. I'd rather have Vance McDonald on the other side of the ball. Speaking of, moving on to the Steelers, Mason Rudolph. I actually have him ranked semi-high this week due to the fact that the Miami Dolphins give up the second most amount of fantasy points to the quarterback position. Let me pull up I had Mason Rudolph as the 15th ranked quarterback. Not the highest that any of the fantasy or any of our guys have ranked quarterbacks this week on SkullKing Football. However, that being said, I have enough confidence in what he can do against this basically inept Dolphins defense that I think that he can score enough points that he was a streamable option for this week. Connor and I believe Samuels is back this week. So I'd have to look again just to make sure, but I believe that Sam is available. Connor's going up against the second, again, the team that has given up the second most amount of fantasy points to the running back position. Let's see, where did I have Connor? Oh, man. I don't even know where I have him ranked. It's all over the place right now. So, in terms of James Conner, I think that he's in for a solid matchup this week. Should put up a decent amount of points. And Samuels, again, he's a 16 teams and more type of streamer to fill in bye weeks. Juju going up against the defense that has given up the 7th most amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Juju may actually have a decent game in this one. I can see him having a solid game and being able to put up a decent amount of points. For those of who have been sitting on Juju, who used a late first, early second on him, he should return a decent amount in this game. And Deontay Johnson, I think, could be a possible streamer for this one. And the tight end, Vance McDonald, going up against a team that's given up the 18th most amount of points to the tight end position. Vance McDonald should be in for a solid game. Mason Rudolph likes dumping off to Vance McDonald, so I think that it should be a good game for him. And just a solid week overall for the Steelers. I think the Steelers come out with the win. So, all right, that is it. I want to thank you guys so much for listening to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood. I can't wait for to see what things look like in terms of the show for tomorrow with the waiver wire ads and kind of see what we're looking at. Hope you guys all had a great week, and we will talk to you guys later. Hey, SkullKing Nation. Thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.